delighted to announce our very first Dial Global panel for the virtual summit today. For those that have just joined us, a very warm welcome indeed to you. On this panel, we're going to be talking about a view from the top, examining how to lead and win through diversity and inclusion, and how organizations can craft better inclusion strategies for a more competitive edge. We're joined by three phenomenal CEOs today on our very first panel. Ben Page, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Ipsos Mori. David Grevemberg, CBE, Chief Executive Officer for the Commonwealth Games Federation. And Christopher Kenna, Chief Executive Officer and Founder for Brand Advance. We're going to be hearing from our summit partners, these leading CEOs, on the importance of providing the vision, reassurance and motivation that, frankly, we need now more than ever before. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of this very first session, I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit of an introduction into your personal and professional background and any insights into why each of you are so very passionate indeed about diversity, inclusion and belonging. David, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this since you caught me, Leila and Campbell. And I can attest. I'm also speaking to you from beautiful tropical Scotland. So it's absolutely stunning. Just to really start. This funny accent I have is obviously not Scottish. I'm from the United States originally, from the wonderful city of New Orleans, which within its own right is a melting pot of not only people, but of cultures and different types of food and different perspectives. And it gave me a great basis to do the work that I do now. Across 71 nations and territories through the power of sport. I have was a former athlete. Sport was very much a vehicle, and it has given me the opportunity to expand my horizons in a number of perspectives and working in really over 83 countries across the world in delivering both development programs, but also major sporting events. And I have to say that without keeping my eyes open and learning how to respect, listen, and learn, and really understanding what diversity looks like, what privilege is, what people's sense of entitlement, but also the range of perspectives that people want to share, but are often not given the opportunity to share. It has continued to be a growth exercise for me in terms of reinforcing and constantly increasing the role that EDI plays, not only in terms of leadership, but true empowerment of people and giving people the social license, not only to explore, and to knock back their ignorance, recover from prejudice, but also really galvanize and strengthen their life and their sense of well-being through a greater perspective of embracing diversity, equality, empowerment, and inclusion, which ultimately, and in closing, which I think really talks to our identity and sense of belonging, not only in our communities or our neighborhoods, but certainly in the businesses that we have the privilege of working with and those that we serve.
Thanks so much, David. And Chris?
Did everyone just see me drop into blackness? I'm like, what has happened to my camera? Shows that it's live. Let me tell you a bit about myself. So the reason why diversity is important to me, well, it's a little bit obvious, you know, the color of my skin means that I'm often in places where I can look a little bit different. I'm a Black gay CEO. I have 2 teenage kids. One is mixed race and the other one's white. You know, the way I look at life is, you know, how does the world treat both my kids? How do they get treated the same? You know, as whether it's, I work in marketing, so whether it's from a consumer angle, they both have the same consumer spend, Bank of Dad, you know, so they should be treated the same. But are they? Are they treated the same as consumers? Are they treated the same as citizens of the world? So, and I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more, but, you know, I founded Brand Advance to sort of try and help make sure that they are looked at the same, you know, the things in the world like keyword blocking and other things in advertising and in society doesn't mean that, you know, my mixed race son has less of a chance than my white blonde haired daughter, you know, just for the very fact of how they look, or, you know, they're both half English, half German. I was in the British Army for 10 years. But they, you know, they should have the same even keel. And if me coming on, you know, working with Dial and standing on stage with streaming on stage with you people means that we can make sure that, you know, both my kids go through life equally, then yeah, I'll continue to shout it every day until it happens.
Thanks so much, Chris. And last but not least, Ben.
Hello. So I'm Ben Page. I run Ipsos Mori in Britain and Ireland. We're part of a large global research organisation that is all about just understanding humanity and why people do the things they do. I've stayed here for 33 years, which is pretty odd. But one of the reasons I've stayed there, apart from the fact that we did a management buyout, which I got sort of partly made me stay, was also in order to change the company to be the way I wanted it to be, and to be a place that anybody from whatever background, wherever you come from, is able to be the best person they can be. And our performance has dramatically improved. The more to be honest, the more we've done that, the more we've trusted people, and the more we've empowered people, and the more we've tried to get people to bring their total self to work, whether they're, you know, LGBT, whatever ethnicity, everybody's background is different. You know, we've just removed the need to have any educational qualifications at all to apply to join what was our graduate trainee scheme. So we keep making those changes. I think that the business case for it is pretty clear. You need to be being diverse to represent the society that you serve, and we're in 90 countries all over the world. We need to understand those communities. When we've made mistakes, and so I saw something we did recently, and I realized we'd missed out something, and I looked at it, and I looked at the team that had created it, and then I realized, you know, that there was one part of diversity that they're pretty diverse, actually, pretty odd lot, actually, but there was one blind spot that they were missing, and it meant that we hadn't thought about one huge group of people in the world. And I think that's just shows the challenge that we face, particularly as an organization that has to represent the world in terms of understanding where people are coming from. So that's why it matters to me. And as I say, if you trust people, empower people, and let them be themselves, in my view, in my personal experience, you perform better.
Thanks ever so much, Ben. And on that note, whilst we dive into the first part of this great panel, I wondered, for all of you, but Ben to lead, what your thoughts are around how CEOs specifically are learning about the challenges given the COVID-19 pandemic. So anything that you're observing in particular, and why is it so key that CEOs do address what is ahead of us given this present time?
One of the things that the data shows is that at times of crisis, people look to both political leaders and also business leaders for leadership. And it seems to be, it's how all sorts of human societies work. So we've seen a surge in support for most politicians, at least during the lockdown phase of the crisis. Didn't quite happen to Donald Trump, but it did all across Europe. But we've also seen it for CEOs, because one of the things that the crisis has made me do, and I suspect other people on this at this conference, is spend a lot more time talking face to face with the digital technology that we now have. I used to talk to everybody every 3 months, literally face to face. Now, of course, because we're going through a sort of 180-degree turn in the business, having to furlough over thousands of people and all of that, we've done it. But I'm now talking to them face to face every week. I mean, I'm wondering whether I better stop soon. But I think people want transparency, they want empathy, and they want clarity, and they want to know that somebody has a plan. And even if you don't have a plan, you better appear that you do, because that's the sort of thing that people look to that at this sort of time. And so spending time doing that, I think, really pays off. You build confidence. You can take people with you, and they are looking for it.
We can give you some immediate feedback there, Ben, because we were speaking to your team yesterday afternoon, and they're saying that your weekly chat with them is the highlight of the week. They look so much forward to you speaking to them on a weekly basis. So the power of the CEO speaking to the team.
I'll pay you later, Campbell.
David and Chris, any thoughts?
Chris, why don't you go?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're leaders. We lead our team, and others look to us as well. I think for me, and for me and my company and my outlook on COVID, it has been a pivotal, wrong word, you know what I'm trying to say, change, in that, let me give you an example. 2.5, 3 months ago, people that were bus drivers, people that cleaned the streets, the lower end of people that worked in hospitals were called low-paid workers. Now they're called key workers. 3 months ago, no marketeer really put that much effort into reaching them demographics. Whether it's Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, or disability, or over 50, whether it's in advertising or just in general outreach. People didn't put that much, not as much sort of effort and resource as they did with mainstream, ABC One in advertising, etc. But now every government wants to speak to them daily, minutely. Every brand wants to reach key workers. Every brand campaign is about key workers, So I think the whole of COVID for me has been a sort of landmark change in one, as a company. I've been totally honest about this with every time I spoke about it. Our revenue has gone up by about 400% since COVID started. Globally, that's on this side of the pond and the other side of the pond. Brands and governments, and we were the outside agency that helped you speak to the other a few months ago. You would go to WPP to speak to mainstream. You'd go to Brand Advance if you want to, if you've got a little bit budget left over and you want to speak to Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, LGBT, disability, religion, etc. Now every government wants to work and with. I'm making it sound all about us, but now every government wants to speak to that demographic. All focus of every brand is trying to be helpful. No one wants a toothpaste ad anymore, but we do need ads that tell us how to look after our dental hygiene when there's no dentist open for 3 months. Helpfulness is what every brand is looking to do, and they want to speak to all sections of society. I'm taking up too much time, but I hope that got my point across a bit.
It absolutely does, Chris. And just very quickly before we move to David, which are some of the publications that we're actually live streaming on? Because I know that we've got some brilliant publications that are under Brand Advance, like the Gay Times, just for example, and I think the Indian Times as well.
Oh, you want me to list some? Oh, gosh, nice. We're on the spot now. We pretty much got 80% of all diverse publications within, Europe, the US, Canada, Australia, etc. So yeah, we're on Gay Times, Attitude, Diva, through to Indian Times, Desi Mag, Muslim Vibe. All these publications that have always been the other. You know, we have our own ad network, which has about 500-600 publications on it, reaching just over 1 billion people a month. We can reach in our ad network, and these have always been the outsiders. You know, even something as massive as the Indian Times. You know, it's massive in India. It's an outside publication in the UK or in the US or anywhere in Europe. You know what I mean? Even though the demographics that it's actually reaching within our own country are pretty big.
Absolutely love it. So bringing the outsiders in ultimately, and this is the great thing about the digitally connected world, is that literally it brings the world so much more together and becomes actually a lot smaller than we think. But David, sorry, coming over to you, just your thoughts on what you've experienced around this pandemic, and I guess how it's affecting sport across the board with Commonwealth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we're in the businesses of creating some people's proudest moments, and a lot of that is, whether we're creating the in-stadium experience from your own home, or creating a festival of sport and culture, like no other every 4 years. But when you stop the traditional convening power of mass gatherings in stadia to watch an event, it throws all that upside down. And actually, I think what certainly we have been reflecting on is obviously, first and foremost, our duty of care in terms of how we respect and protect those that we serve, and recognizing the diversity for those we serve. The Commonwealth represents 71 nations and territories. We have our geography is vast and very diverse in itself, in terms of we have 2/3 of the world's small states and island states. We have half of the top 20 emerging cities in terms of growth are within the Commonwealth. So whether it's urban sustainability or the plights of small states and island states or vulnerable states, 1.6 billion, 60% of the Commonwealth is under the age of 60. Okay, and that's under the age of 60%,
age of 30,
age of 29. So a very youthful Commonwealth, but again, very. So what I would have to say is that as a company, and as a sport organization that represents, and I get back to this point, serves these communities, and really seeing ourselves not in these traditional hierarchical, patriarchal constructs that sport and many institutions have nurtured for years. What COVID has done is turn that on its head. And I think there's this wonderful word, I love to throw out these words to ponder on. It's adhocracy. Moving from a bureaucracy to an adhocracy has been something that I think no longer the privilege, but the right of digital engagement is forcing us to really stylistically, courageously, responsibly use different methods to uphold our values, reflect on the narrative of our values as a company. How do we design, not just in terms of a recovery mode, but a reformation and reset mode of how we actually are going to maintain some of the lessons learned from this experience. When we can't convene like we used to, when we have to do things differently, how do we still serve and add value to our company? That really comes down to the diversity in our message, the resonance and universality of our voice, but really comes down to the diverse representation of our decision making. And as a white guy from the southern United States, I have one perspective, but I have one perspective. There are many more perspectives out there that I need to respect, listen, and learn from before I'm able to contribute effectively. And I think that that's something that's been reinforced through having to engage through mediums like this more frequently, that I think is a valuable lesson that we've learned.
Ben, you got something you want to say there?
Absolutely. I hope that there is a new social contract after we come out of coronavirus. I hope that the key workers who have been revealed to make society run our health and care services, but are often the worst paid people in society, I hope there's a new deal. As a boring realist who just looks at data, so I'm the data geek, all I would say is that if you look at human values over time, a 2-month shock like this doesn't necessarily change them overall. I mean, if you look at how we are, here we are using a technology that didn't exist, until quite recently. Back in 1999, only 13% of people in Europe roughly had the internet. It's now, well over 90%. And yet the proportion of people who say that their life is being destroyed by technology is identical today as it was in 1999. So the long-term trends that were already there before the virus, becoming more liberal in our values, more accepting of things like homosexuality, less racist, all of those trends will continue. And certainly there's been a massive digital acceleration over the last 2 months. But I don't know that this isn't like World War II, which was 6 years, and then we came out of it and we did things very differently. So for everybody who wants a reset, wants a green reset, wants a better social contract, you are going to have to fight for it, because there will be a lot of people, businesses and indeed governments, who will be so desperate for economic growth as we go into a recession out of this, that they may decide just to stop all sorts of things and just go back to how we were at high speed. And indeed on carbon, that's what happened after 2008. So absolutely, if you're on this call, you want to make a difference, this is your moment. There is a window of opportunity before business goes back to normal.
Very good. On you go, Chris.
Yeah. Do you mind if I could add to it? And I totally agree. I think one ray of hope that I have is money talks. So I can only talk from the advertising point, but advertisers, brands, wanting to, what is the role of a marketeer? No matter where you are, we're meant to get a brand in front of as many eyeballs as possible and either show them something they wanted to buy or convince them of buying something they didn't even know they wanted. That's our job. That's what we do. I think the fact that a lot of brands have now had to, whether it's by necessity or whether it's because they felt it was the right thing to do, whatever the reason is, they've now been reaching demographics, consumers, not demographics, let's call them what they are in advertising, reaching consumers for a whole lot less than they were doing when they were doing it over there 2 months earlier, and getting more return because they haven't had the last 20, 30 years of constant commercial hammering. You know what I mean? So I think that's my little ray of hope is money talks. And when, people will come out of this, and when CMOs and CEOs sit down and look at the bottom line and what did we do during this and where did we make some money, when they realize that they actually could buy, the cost of acquisition fell down when they started reaching these demographics, my hope and my wish is that they sort of continue that, reaching the 9.3 million Black, Asian, minority ethnic in the UK is actually 1/3 of the cost of reaching everybody else. But actually, they consume the products just as much. That so that's my hope. I hope.
Right. Very good. No, thanks very much for that, Chris. If I could move us on now, please, I'd like to ask each of you, what is your personal level of involvement as a CEO in the role of diversity and inclusion? So, Chris, would you like to kick us off, please?
Yep. It's ingrained in everything. It's just in absolutely everything I say, everything the company stands for, and everything everybody else within the company stands for. Brand Advance is like a diversity Noah's Ark. There are 2 of everybody, plus some. And I think, I can't speak for other companies, and I'm sure the guys will speak for themselves and their companies, but I think I can only imagine it's harder to really bring in diversity you're starting, you know, some period after the company started. We started with, can I even say it, with positive discrimination in our policy, i.e. we have a lot of you, we're going to now look in that pool and see, you know, and it's not, I think a lot of the time it's sort of, people think of it, you have to lower a standard to bring in another demographic, you know, as if, you know, bringing in more people of color into your company is a lowering of your standard because there's people that aren't of color that can do the job as well. Do you know what I mean? That's a silly little argument. I come across it all the time. It's, you know, I think it goes off 6 degrees of separation. So because there are 2 of everybody, when we need 4 of everybody, that 6 degrees of separation from the 2 of everybody brings in the 4 of everyone. You know, diversity isn't a problem within Brand Advance because it started with a black gay guy, and then 1 became 2, and then 2 became 4, and you know, and we've made sure. I got into the army because of positive discrimination. I was in care, and I was of color, and they were 2 reasons why it took me 3 days from signing up to be in basic training. 3 days normally takes up to 6 months. So, you know, and it was for them 2 reasons, because I was a care kid and because that. So I think, you know, I've been all for positive discrimination all my life. I don't know if I should keep saying the word over because sometimes people go, we can't do that. But I just mean we can't represent these demographics if they're not in the office helping us to represent them demographics for our clients.
Thank you. Ben,
you can't see it, you can't hear it. I love that Noah's Ark analogy. That's absolutely brilliant, Chris. Apologies, Ben.
Well, it's a bit of push and pull, actually. So, I mean, I think one of the things you have to recognize is that so I was born in 1965 and I was a teenager in the 1980s. So my idea about what's, you know, what is a good society or what sort of place I want to be is going to be different than my boss, who was born in the 1940s. His idea, and he was a teenager in the 1960s, his idea about what society is like is different to mine. And of course, I have to recognize that people born in 2000 who work for me now, their ideas about it are completely different. My son, Gen Z, you know, so my generation, 88% of us describe ourselves as completely straight. For the Gen Z generation, that's 66%. So, you know, so first of all, because we're about data, we like looking at these things, but it is when I say push and pull, some of it's about some of it's making the company the sort of place that I would have liked it to have been when I joined in 1987. But actually, of course, there's generations now coming on after me, and they want something that's about, you know, is right for 2020. And of course, my attitudes have changed since the 1980s, but I am still a child of the 1960s. So I think it's recognizing that, and it's empowering people and giving them the tools to do things and create things. So we have networks, we have clubs, we have targets. We discuss data where, you know, the gender difference in pay is analysed to death, you know, so we know exactly why we pay women slightly more than men until they're about 35. And then we become very prejudiced against women once they hit 35 and start paying men more. We know why we do that. We're trying to fix it. We know why we underrepresent Black and minority ethnic people at senior levels. And again, in some of these things are hard to fix quickly. There are a lot more white people than Black and minority ethnic people in Britain. Yeah. You know, but nevertheless, but I think but it is a mixture of push and pull. And indeed, when we look at how change happens in society, it's always push and pull. When you know, homosexuality was legalized in the 1950s, 60s, when I was born, it was illegal to be gay in Britain. And we now have 66% who say it would be fine if Harry had married a man rather than Meghan Markle. And indeed, Meghan Markle probably would have been happier, to be quite honest. Harry might have been, for all I know. And so, you know, so society is changing, and you have to reflect that. You have to understand why things happen and why they're like they are, and then you have to put some steps in progress to make differences. So, you know, I just decided at one point to make my board gender neutral. In fact, my bonus is targeted on my ability to create a gender neutral pay across the company. So I lose money if I don't achieve that. But we need to keep going on that. And, you know, we're now having a big debate about whether we should be biased against people who went to private schools. You know, and in a sense, it never ends, because society keeps evolving, and what society is like in 100 years' time will be different than it is now. And so there's a mixture of push, there's a mixture of pull from below, and you need to be on top of all of that. That's my take on it.
Yeah, Ben, when you became the CEO of Ipsos Mori in 2009, I mean, where was D&I on the agenda then, and where does it sit now?
It was there, but it was much less. We were much more hierarchical. I mean, what I've spent a lot of time doing, not always consciously, but is building a culture over my tenure as chief executive to be the sort of place that I would like it to be. And it is, you know, the leader is very important in setting the tone.
Yeah.
Because as everybody on this call knows, everything you do, everything you don't do, everything you say, but also everything you don't say, is people notice.
It's amplified.
And so you have to really think about that. But it's about building a culture that ultimately defaults to the right thing. And gradually, as you strengthen that culture, you can reinforce it from time to time. But in the end, you want to make yourself redundant and have a culture that doesn't need you. And if I've done anything in the last 11 years, hopefully that's what I've done. You know, now my job is nearly done. Maybe we'll see. I keep thinking.
Thank you. Well, Ben, I mean, I'm going to say you only look after UK and Ireland, but I mean, David's got the Commonwealth in his hand, you know, so I think you might have quite a bigger task there, David.
Well, I think it's different but the same. I mean, I would say that, you know, some of the challenges we have and the role that the chief executives play. I always say that certainly the approach I've taken. When it's bad, you lead from the front. When it's great, you lead from the bottom, and that's it. And so what it is that you actually put forward your people and their ideas and their recognition when times are good, and you defend them to the hilt. And I think that is something that, as a chief executive, particularly in creating selfless cultures of respect and learning and evolving, it's absolutely critical that the CEO sets the tempo, but also engenders the social license for people to be open, transparent, and to show respect. I worked for about 16 years in the Paralympic sport movement, and just the sheer diversity, not in terms of just you know, I would say that the social diversity, but the physical diversity and mental diversity that is represented in the world of disability. And then you start to put layers of culture and ethnicity and religion and sexuality and all of that. It was one of the greatest laboratories that I had to witness things. And the approach in managing all of that when I worked there has really continued on to my various roles as a chief executive, in that you are only as marginalized, disabled, whatever you want to label it as, is the way people treat you and your ability to adapt to your environment. So as chief executives, if we can create an environment where people are treated with respect, people are embraced for their diversity, that we actually truly embrace the continuum from segregation to integration to inclusion, and that we really, really look, you know, at this notion of bringing forward the concept, or I guess the concepts of you know, of equality in an environment that is adapted for that, whether that's physical, whether that's mental or spiritual. And I find that those two pieces, how we treat people and the environments that we create, chief executives are in that prime position of either being the single point of truth or single point of failure, which you don't want to be either. So I think to Ben's point, you want to really create a culture that you become not necessarily redundant, but that you know, it's not strict dependency on failure or success with the chief executive. It's actually to the opposite. It's failure or success with the values, the culture, the character, and the personality that we represent. And it is a combination of just really creating the right culture and environment to do so.
I
Thank you.
absolutely concur, David. And actually, you answered part of my next question, which was all around creating this culture, which is ideal. And obviously, you know, we want to get to that point where diversity and inclusion is business as usual for better and at all of those different levels, because this is, I mean, it's a pretty relentless task. It's got to be mile wide, but also mile deep. And you know, whilst you know, we've kind of dipped in and out of kind of personal stories throughout the beginning of this panel, I wonder whether there were any personal stories that each of you, you know, David, I know you have a remarkable one that you may like to share about some of your personal experiences relating to D&I, or even, you know, how you grew up. Chris, I know you kindly shared yours there, which you know, I think is fantastic. And I do think where leaders, in specific CEOs, are brave enough almost to be vulnerable, that has a huge ripple effect, because it is in essence almost saying to teams and to the wider world, do you know what, it's okay, I'm not perfect, and me sharing is allowing you hopefully to then feel comfortable enough to share how you truly feel, and to be able to then ideally bring your true self into the workplace. David.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Growing up in New Orleans as a white kid, and I say that because when I was growing up in the 70s and in the city of New Orleans, and even to this day, and it still resonates in the news today, the issue of racism and the cause of racial tension in our city was very defining socially, economically, and certainly environmentally, and really challenged the peace, the sustainability, and the prosperity of the city. Now, as a 12-year-old, I can tell you I was not nearly as conscious or articulate in being able to reflect on this, but something really occurred to me. I had gone to New Orleans public school really up until the age of 12. You know, was for blocks the only white kid in my neighborhood. And I did not see very much difference or diversity. I experienced it. I experienced prejudice, and as we do, as being a minority in a minority community. And that was fascinating in terms of some of my own, if I reflect back now on it, my own sense of identity, and I would say identity crisis, if you will, as I've tried to find a sense of belonging in different aspects. What I really recognized, though, at that time, is that some of the root causes of not addressing things like the legacy of slavery, and not just because things are not talked about, subscribing to the fact that they shouldn't be talked about. I think there's a lot of things that in this world, now that we're better connected and better informed, we are faced with this constant question, and things are moving much faster, as Ben was saying. This is a fast-paced world, and we're so used to this tempo. If we are given the opportunity to make a difference, and we choose not to, what side of history will we have written for ourselves, and what side will we be written on? And I always look at that, and that's one of the challenges I faced everyone. I think what I learned through my own journey of having to actually, when I went to the great white public schools out, or private school out in the suburbs, going from my public school experience in the inner city, those different transitions and those transformations, the reflection that we do on ourselves and how we use that is quite important. And I do think everyone's personal story I know you subscribe to this notion of authenticity, Layla. That notion of authenticity is a combination of the stories that we hold in ourselves and the decisions we make and the impact of those decisions we have. And if you do not recognize and reflect on your life, the diversity of your life, and why you may have certain prejudice or you're ignorant to certain experiences, then you actually are not fit for necessarily adapting to all situations. And so I think it's really it's an attitude, it's a mindset that I've tried to take. And I can tell you, it'll be a constant work in progress till I'm 6 feet under, in terms of constantly trying to refresh, reflect, and learn. But there is a sequence to that, and certainly, what I try to do as a chief executive is take people on that journey, wherever they may be on that journey in themselves, to get the best out of themselves and ultimately deliver the best work of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, David. Just conscious of timing here for everyone. We've got a plethora of questions actually that are coming down through the chat. And I will just say very, very quickly to everyone who is tuning in, I'm really sorry we can't answer all of your questions. We're going to pull out literally a couple for the guys on the panel for you. But don't worry, they are going to be hanging around in the summit itself if you aren't streaming in, so you can jump onto the live chat there. But very, very quickly, before we do wrap up to go to break, Campbell.
All right. Okay, Ben, we have got a question in there from Lorraine, and she would like to know, what is your true measure for inclusion at Ipsos Mori? And when you reach your intended goal of diversity, what's next?
Well, I guess it would be trying to make our company representative of the city that we are based in, which is primarily London. So London is one of the most diverse cities on earth. I grew up in rural Devon, which was very, very different, and it's almost, London is often shocking to people who don't really know what Britain is like, or don't know what London is like when they first arrive. You get somebody from New Zealand, and they don't really know what they're going to get when they get to London. No, my job is to try. One of the things that we're going to try and do, we're gradually trying to do, is make the company more representative, much more representative of both the city and the communities that we research and understand. So we measure, our diversity in terms of ethnicity, gender, sexuality, etc. We're now looking at culture and education, and that's even more tricky. And I think it is, as other speakers have said, it's a work in progress. It's unlikely to get there, because even if I set a benchmark today, societal expectations of what it should be like will be different in 10 or 15 years' time as the next generation arrives. But it's just being conscious of it. And ultimately, it's about getting the best, making sure you've got the best people, whoever they are, to do, and then letting them do brilliant work and help, and giving them the freedom to do that. And if you can do that, it will all work. But you also need some measurement and some targets, because otherwise you'll be distracted by the day-to-day of business.
Mm-hmm. Very well said indeed, Ben. Thank you very much for that. And very quickly, we have a little note here saying to David, actually, saying from James Brandon, said he had the privilege of being one of the patrons of Pride House in Glasgow and carried the baton to the Gold Coast in 2018 and on to Birmingham 2020. I'm told by the team via WhatsApp, actually, we've got a lot of personal questions for each of you, and thank you very, very much indeed. I'm very, very quickly going to ask you one last question, actually, Chris. I'm going to give you 1 minute if that's okay. So apologies, but a question here from Tim. Chris, you spoke about the change of context, changing from people's views on what is valuable, key workers, not low paid workers. How do we maintain this more human view of the world moving forwards?
Because how do we? I hope we do. I think I've said it before, and I really strongly believe it. I think change happens a whole lot faster when there's a commercial interest in that change happening. Doing it because it's the right thing to do is great. And, there's people here now are doing things because it's the right thing to do. But, let's look at 60, 70% of CEOs, and they'll do it a whole lot quicker if there's a commercial.
Very good.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you all very, very, very much indeed for being on this panel.